having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be
Welcome.
here. So I first went vegan in 2016, around then. Before that point, I think food was super functional in my life. But I was working in like content and editorial jobs in the sort of big corporate world in London, and I was working in a fashion house, and part of my job was interviewing lots of like bands and artists. There was kind of quite a big editorial like aspect to the brand. And at that time, we started interviewing lots of like veggie and vegan chefs. It was quite like it's obviously not a new thing, like being vegan has been around for a long time, but especially in London at that point in time, you couldn't really go to a restaurant like you can now and just say, oh, do you have something vegan? Like they wouldn't really know like what it was at that time. So we started interviewing lots of amazing chefs, and I luckily got to be on set with a lot of them, sort of interviewing them or taking some photos and getting to try all of their delicious creations. And I think it just really inspired me. It sparked something in me, and I thought, just for a month I'm going to go veggie and see how this goes. And I really enjoyed it, and I think I had like a sausage sandwich, and then I was like, nah, I think I'm done. So after that, so originally it was kind of like the taste that had like really excited me, and I started watching all of those documentaries that were kind of exploding at the time on Netflix, like Cowspiracy, and I read Jonathan Safran Foer's book, Eating Animals, and I kind of knew that it was kind of going more towards eliminating dairy and eggs as well from my diet. So it took about 6 to 9 months of me kind of like trying, but then, you know, accidentally eating something with milk, and I was kind of faffing for a while, and I got to the point where I was annoying myself, and I was like, no, I'm going to do this. So I just kind of went vegan after about that 9-month mark, and I've been vegan ever since.
Wow. Awesome stuff. Like thinking back to those kind of first experiences, and then you starting like cooking vegetarian first and then ultimately vegan. But thinking back to those first experiences when you were talking to chefs and so on and trying this amazing food, was the reality, did it kind of match up to what did you get after it from a cooking point of view, or were you kind of like, I don't even know how to create what they created?
Yeah, for sure. I remember one incident with a sweet potato that I did. You know, when you kind of, you're trying to recreate what you know it can be, but your culinary skills don't quite match up. And as I mentioned, food was like super functional in my life. So, and also kind of living that sort of like 9 to 5 out all the time, didn't really have much time at home to kind of prep things or put the time in. And I very quickly learned that if you want to get better at something, you need to dedicate some time to it. But also just that prep of kind of looking in the supermarkets at like what you can and can't eat. Now, obviously, like 7 years in or something, it's like second nature. I know what I can and can't have. But when you're at the start of that journey, there's a lot more kind of like, oh, is this okay or is that okay? And I hadn't really done all that much like cooking from scratch. So like the sweet potato incident, I remember coming home from work on like a dark, rainy like Tuesday night, and I think I'd had a full day of work. Then maybe I'd been to like a gym class, and I was like, oh, I'm going to make this, I don't know, epic sweet potato creation, like a recipe that I'd found online. But I remember trying to like peel the sweet potato, and for some reason I was just really struggling with it. And then I remember just being like, oh, this is ridiculous. And then I had like a bowl of cereal for dinner, and I don't know, it was just like a lot of those kind of things when I first tried to go vegan. But it takes time, so it's just being patient with yourself for sure.
And did it eventually it came, I take it? Oh,
yeah, definitely. I think as well it helped that I was like super enthusiastic about it, and I was like sharing everything that I'd learned like with my partner, and we kind of went on that sort of like going vegan journey together. So we could do a lot of our cooking together and a lot of kind of like failed experiments and successful experiments with food. So that was really enjoyable.
How about sort of the wider aspects of veganism? How quickly did they come to you? Obviously, we're talking sort of from a culinary perspective, but when did the kind of the wider ethics and so on kind of come into your view? Were they there sort of early on? Was that the driver?
Yeah, pretty quick, because as I mentioned, I was working in fast fashion, and then obviously sort of like reading more and more about like the wider ethical aspects of veganism. I kind of was a bit like, I don't know if this kind of role is sitting, it doesn't really feel like in a huge amount of alignment with me anymore. And that kind of was the start of my journey towards running my own creative business. So in 2018, I stepped away from that kind of corporate life in London, and I stayed in London for a bit, but I decided to run my own creative business. And I think that was very much inspired by my vegan journey. If you had to kind of pinpoint a moment in time where it all kind of spiraled from, it was definitely that kind of waking up. And I've had friends describe it like, in the Matrix, where you take the pill and then you can't sort of like unsee things. So yeah, I definitely kind of started to branch out into my own creative practices. So photography, teaching yoga, that also became like a huge part of my journey. I started my yoga teacher training in around 2017, and I studied that for a year. It was like one weekend each month. And yeah, I became a yoga teacher and started doing like photography and copywriting and social media. And I did that for my first year of kind of freelancing. And then I decided it was a little bit too chaotic and there's too much going on. So I let the threads of it kind of fall away, and I landed with teaching yoga and being a commercial photographer, which fast forward to today, and I'm still doing those two things.
Nice. It's so you hear it so often, this kind of idea of somebody like finds veganism, if you like, and this unplugged from the matrix kind of analogy, and then it sort of seeps into every aspect of their life in terms of their view of their own work and what they're doing, and does it, and the impact of things, even if they're not directly related to kind of animals, etc. But there's kind of like, what's the impact of this? It can be, often people go down this environmental route and so on. So it's kind of fascinating to hear that. It really chimes with me, because something very similar has kind of happened over the course of years in terms of like moving away from a big corporate role into kind of freelance work and so on, as a result of the same kind of trigger points. I was like, well, I don't really want to be part of that anymore. I don't feel comfortable with it and so on. It's kind of interesting.
For sure. I'm really grateful for the experience, and it definitely shaped who I am. And I don't want to like demonize corporate life. It's just, I knew that for me, I wanted to kind of march to the beat of my own drum, and it all all those threads came together at the right time, and that's just what's worked for me.
Yeah, 100%. Did you have a bit of a network of people around you who were on similar journeys? You mentioned your partner and so on, but was there a kind of a wider network?
Yes, but not one that we kind of already had sort of like pre-existing, but we did fall into a really supportive, lovely like vegan community in London, like at that time. And I would say a large part of how we sort of became friends with those people or became integrated into that community was when we published a vegan coffee table magazine. We don't run it anymore, but it was called Omnom magazine. The name started as a bit of a joke, and then we couldn't think of anything else, and it stuck. And we just wanted to, tell the stories of businesses who were launching vegan products or services, tell the stories of, parents who are trying to raise vegan kids. We really covered it from lots of different angles. So it's like lifestyle angle, brand and product angle, food angle. We talked to chefs about sustainability and all sorts. So that was really, really enjoyable experience. And we put that magazine together ourselves. Like obviously I'd worked in editorial and content, so I had that background, and my partner did as well. So we were quite well equipped. And then, we didn't really know what we were doing. We bought a book that was called How to Publish a Magazine.
Right.
And we went by the book. And it was great. It was really, really fun. But it was back in the day where you kind of had to order a load of copies, and then a whole crate would like arrive at your house. And then you were like, oh shit, like now I've got to get rid of like 1,000 magazines because they are just sat in my living room. But through creating that magazine, we became friends with loads of awesome people in the community, and that was a really, really enjoyable time.
Yeah. Can I ask a yoga question? I feel like I'm pivoting.
Yeah,
but it kind of it always intrigues me. I remember like what the first kind of vegan which was before the podcast actually started. And the inspiration for the podcast was something that happened at a vegan festival back in 2019, I want to say, so pre-COVID. And there was a guest speaker there. She was a lady from California who was a yoga teacher. And she said, I think she opened up her talk with, if you're doing yoga and you're not vegan, you're just stretching. And so whenever I speak to any yoga teachers, I love to sort of talk about that. So it would be good to get your perspective.
Yeah, okay. So the reason she probably said that is because yoga is like underpinned by sort of like 8 limbs of yoga, which kind of go beyond the asana, which is the third step. And the asana is like the shapes that you make on the mat. But another is ahimsa, which is like non-violence. So I guess what she's saying is eating animals is violence, and to be a true yogi, in air quotes, you should practice non-violence. But I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Obviously, I'm plant-based, but in like a really non-judgy way. I think everyone, like, no one learns through shame, like other people or yourself. If you're shaming yourself, you're not going to learn. Shaming others, it's not the best way to kind of move forwards. I think that attitude of kind of judgment is also not very yogic. So there's that level too.
Yeah.
And I think everyone comes to their own sort of boundaries and their own standards, like in their own time. And that's totally fine.
That's really interesting, because whilst I've spoken to a number of sort of yoga teachers, they've not really talked about it from that perspective of like, well, actually there's a judgment in that statement. And that's kind of really fascinating to me. From your experience, are the two kind of hand in hand quite a lot from other yoga teachers you speak to in that yoga community? Like, does veganism get talked about a lot from that ahimsa point of view?
Interesting. It's not like a conversation that comes up a lot with sort of my friends who are yoga teachers, and some of them are veggie, some of them are vegan, and some of them are not. It's not really something that is a huge point of contention in our conversations or in the community. No.
That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it is interesting.
I just thought I'd ask. So fast forward. When did you get to Bristol? So you moved from London, you mentioned.
Yeah, we moved from London in 2020. So we arrived in Bristol like 3 weeks before the pandemic like shut everything down. Right. Which is an interesting time. So this year is kind of the first year that we've really been able to kind of enjoy Bristol and all of its kind of open, normal, beautiful glory.
And Bristol's kind of renowned for vegan culture, and it'd be good to get your findings on that as somebody who's been there for a couple of years, and then like you say, been able to actually experience that in the last year. What's your findings been? Yeah,
it's a really, really amazing vegan food scene. Obviously London is as well, but towards the end, when I first arrived in London, I had that youth and enthusiasm and passion to kind of move all over the city to explore all the new hotspots that were opening, and towards the end I definitely got a little bit lazy, as I think tends to happen. So I would say the benefit of being in Bristol is that it's all very close. So it's a smaller city, so lots of vegan options that are all close by, which is amazing. And yeah, there's a mixture of kind of places that are just purely vegan, but then there's places that are kind of cater to all, but have like great vegan sections like on their menu. So yeah, we're really spoiled here. There's so much choice.
So cool. So tell me about the book. When did the inspiration for that start? Like, let's talk about that journey.
Yeah. So as I landed into Bristol in 2020, I've obviously mentioned that my freelance career was kind of teaching yoga and being a commercial photographer. But when I arrived in Bristol, and everything was shut down, I didn't have any of those kind of pre-existing connections or relationships with studios or students here. So I was kind of panicking a bit. I was like, oh no, what am I going to do as like my main sort of source of income? Because in London, I'd been teaching like 12 or 13 classes a week. It was my primary source of income. At that time in sort of 2018, 2019, I'd only been doing maybe one photo shoot per month. I was really kind of easing my way into it and learning the trade, learning the craft. So when I got here, my partner was like, I think you're going to have to flip the way that you're doing things so that photography kind of takes up more of your time. And then as things open and we can kind of meet with people, then you can build yoga back into your life in Bristol. So that's what I did. And I put a big concerted effort into getting better. We had obviously all that time at home, so I could shoot a lot at home. my specialty is product and food, so it's not as if I had to be shooting weddings or with people. So it was, luckily, I was very fortunate to be able to do a lot of that at home. So I really kind of put my mind to learning shooting with flash, really getting good at sort of styling, and learning how to use Lightroom. I think at that time, before I'd done any training, if there are any photographers listening, I wasn't really sure how Lightroom worked properly. I had like 13,000 images in one catalogue, which, if you're a photographer, will make you laugh. So basically that was my kind of journey into kind of centering photography a little bit more into my life. And then I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease last year in 2021. And I finally got to remission this year. And when I was finally feeling a little bit better, the idea landed with me, really just kind of landed in my head, kind of came out of nowhere, that I wanted to create a cookbook for people with Crohn's and colitis. So it's called the Plant-Based Crohn's and Colitis Cookbook. And I've written it and photographed it, and it will be coming out in January of 2023.
Wow, awesome! Well, congratulations. That sounds like an awesome achievement to have got to this point where you're about to release this amazing book. Like, talking about the diagnosis and so on. Like, did you at that point kind of instantly think, okay, I need to look at my nutrition and make some tweaks and changes? Was that kind of like front of mind? What was that kind of journey like to sort of discovering the benefits of a well planned plant-based diet?
For sure. So when I was diagnosed, like, my medical team have been amazing, but I would say that the focus of the treatment was very much on like medication, and medication for Crohn's and colitis is very important. Like, the medication that I'm on now got me to remission, and I'm very, very thankful for it. But there was no mention at all of kind of diet or lifestyle factors, and they do play a role. So no one was kind of asking, like, what do you eat, or, you know, how stressful is your life, what is your job, or like how much movement do you do? But obviously, just from kind of lived experience of moving my body a lot and already being plant-based for many years, I knew that what you eat has an impact on how you feel, and like your recovery time when you exercise, and your general well-being. So I did seek out a nutritionist who could support me through that aspect, and she was kind of laughing. She was amazed. She was like, I don't understand how you can be reporting to feel so well, but you're anemic, you're like deficient in all of these things. You have an active Crohn's disease, you're in a flare. Like, you shouldn't really be feeling as well as you say that you're feeling. So she did attribute that largely to eating a plant-based diet and to moving my body regularly to kind of help manage stress and things like that. So yeah, I knew already. But she obviously gave me lots of extra tweaks and things that I could incorporate more to kind of round out what I was already doing. And then in the process of putting together all of the recipes for the cookbook, I'm kind of drawing on my lived experience of cooking for Crohn's disease, as well as kind of some evidence-based research with the likes of Dr. Alan Desmond, who you had on the podcast recently. He's been really inspirational for me in my journey, because he's a gastroenterologist and he's a big advocate of plant-based diets for all of his patients, but particularly those with an IBD diagnosis.
Did you have to make many significant changes? Was your diet before, you know, quote, not that there's any sort of bad or good, I think everything's in, you know, but was it generally a positive diet before? You mentioned that your dietitian, your nutritionist was saying, you know, I'm amazed that you're not showing, you know, more or feeling more of these symptoms, and attributed that to your diet. Would you say, like, you know, by the sort of the Dr. Desmond kind of textbook, if you like, was your diet pretty on point, or did you have a lot of work to do in terms of like removing processed and things like that? What was it like? Yeah,
I think it was kind of like maybe 70% of the way there, but there's always like more that you can do, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I think in general, the kind of the advice, and this is kind of what my cookbook really focuses on, is removing like spicy foods. Spicy foods can really trigger flares if you have IBD. Removing caffeine and really like limiting alcohol intake. Really focusing on kind of like a whole foods approach. So as you mentioned, kind of eliminating as much as possible like the ultra processed foods. And I would say beforehand, we definitely relied a lot more on kind of like, like the air quotes fake like sausages or, things like that. So, and again, you don't have to be perfect. You should still have to be able to enjoy your food. So it's not sort of like a never again attitude, but it's more just kind of in moderation. And then also kind of eliminating raw or like uncooked vegetables. So a lot of people with IBD struggle to digest vegetables that have not been cooked. So a lot of the recipes in my cookbook, for instance, will be peeled, so removing the skins and then really cooking down so that everything is as soft as possible. And I would say as well that like a blender and a food processor have become like my best friends. A lot of the recipes, again, in my cookbook are kind of, I want to say like pre-digested, but you know what I mean? Kind of like already broken down as much as possible to really help with that digestion process. So lots of kind of warming soups and stews that just have like no spice but still flavorful, but just nothing that's going to aggravate.
What was the process of putting the collection of recipes together like? Was this kind of quite straightforward? Like you mentioned, this is kind of my lived experience. Here's the recipes I've got. Let's just put them all together. Or was there quite a bit of research into like, well, this works for me. Will that work for everybody? Let me try.
Yeah, for sure. It's a mix. And I would say the thing with IBD is that everyone has like very different triggers. So while I might be able to tolerate mushrooms, okay, someone else might be like, oh no, I really can't eat mushrooms. They don't sit well with me. And there's no kind of rhyme or reason to it. So it's not as if it's like a certain group of food, like nightshades or, something like that. So I think I've done a lot of consideration into trying to make the recipes as adaptable as possible and to give substitution ideas. So, if you can't tolerate onions, maybe swap them out for shallots. Or if you can't tolerate garlic, maybe you could try a garlic infused oil, just things like this, because obviously like while I'm creating it, I'm trying to include as much variety as possible so that I can kind of, diversity is great in a plant-based diet, but then also just in terms of like, I don't want all of the recipes to focus on tomatoes. And then someone's like, well, I can't tolerate tomatoes and 70% of your recipes are tomatoes. So, just trying to kind of incorporate that balance. But in terms of what I wanted to put into the cookbook, again, I already kind of had a great idea just through having experienced what it's like to, at some point in my journey, I could barely eat solid food at all. So there's quite a lot of like, those like spreads and sauces and smoothies and all sorts of things.
Wow. It's just amazing. Like the scale of it, I'm interested in as well. Like, I'm not expecting you to necessarily know the stats, but from your experience, so is there a lot of people in those kind of situations, like experiencing the kind of symptoms that you experienced with IBD, with colitis, and so on? I'm just intrigued as to like I do, and I actually the level of it.
I think I do. In the cookbook, I've got how many people. So over 500,000 people in the UK have an IBD diagnosis, which is quite a lot. And
that is a lot.
In the US, it's 1.6 million, and there's 70,000 new cases diagnosed in the US every year. So it's quite a lot.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I actually had no idea what it was before I was diagnosed. I'd never heard of Crohn's disease, and it's not really something that's talked about. It's an invisible illness. So I guess like to look at someone with Crohn's or colitis, you wouldn't really know necessarily that anything was wrong with them. And then also because a lot of the symptoms do involve things like diarrhea and constipation, it's a gastrointestinal like disease. A lot of those can maybe be embarrassing to talk about. So people don't want to necessarily advertise, hey, I've got diarrhea. So and that's another reason why it might not end up being talked about. But I was really surprised that, once I received my diagnosis and was sharing that with friends and family, like how many people would say, oh, my aunt, my cousin, my sister, my brother has it. So it's very interesting.
Well, a really good friend of mine did it at university, and talking to Dr. Desmond and talking to yourself is really fascinating. I remember when he was diagnosed and we were at university together, so we were living together and so on, and so we were went to a hospital appointment or two, and I remember then he was told at one point, because he'd lost a lot of weight and so on in the treatments, that essentially just eat. It was a bit like the Dr. Desmond story of like eat whatever you want, like, so it was like, boxes of donuts and so on just to get his body weight back up. And I remember thinking at the time, and I wasn't particularly nutritionally savvy, being a young student living in Cardiff, having a great time. But I remember thinking, I'm not sure that sounds right to me. And so many years later, it's really interesting hearing people like yourself, people like Dr. Desmond, with your experiences.
I'm really lucky to have people like Dr. Alan Desmond who can sort of share that light with us, because if you don't find out that information from your own medical team, it's just amazing that people can be sharing that online and kind of democratizing that information for everyone. And it is one of the first questions that you have if you have a diagnosis like this, because what do I eat? And I think there's a lot of confusion around it, and it's not helpful if someone says, eat that box of donuts, that's fine.
It was just like, eat calories, you just need calories, so just whatever you can get, something calorie dense that you like. Donuts, like, eat them.
All of that sugar is going to be really, really good for your Crohn's disease.
It couldn't have been good, but there we go. So moving on to the kind of publishing process, how has that been? Because you're self-publishing this book, right?
Yes, I am. So it didn't feel as intimidating as it might have felt, because I'd obviously already been through this experience of publishing Omnom magazine back in like 2017, when it felt more complicated because we weren't as lucky enough to have like those Amazon print on demand services like we have now, which again is great because it really democratizes the whole process of publishing. If you have a narrative and a story and you want to put it out there, then anyone can do it, which is awesome. And I did consider going the traditional route and putting together a pitch for a publishing house, but at the end of the day I thought about it, and I just wanted to crack on and do it, and I didn't really want to wait for permission for someone to say this idea has value or this idea does not have value, because to me it does, and hopefully to the people in the IBD community it will. I really hope it can help. And I also kind of wanted as much control as possible over how it looked, and I wanted to pick my own front cover. I wanted every single recipe to have a picture with it. I'm obviously a food photographer, and the visual aspect of it was really important to me. It's a really bright and colourful cookbook. Obviously having the disease is really long and tiring and hard work, and I think sometimes you can end up seeing food as the enemy a little bit. You just think, if I'm going to eat this, am I going to be in pain? Am I going to regret this in a few hours? So I really wanted to bring like an element of fun visually to the cookbook. There's lots of movement and hard shadows, and hopefully it just looks really joyful to look at. So it was really important to me to have that creative freedom over the direction of the book. So for those reasons, I just thought, I'm going to self-publish.
Yeah, 100%. I don't blame you, and especially with somebody with your experience, like me doing it, not a photographer, without that kind of creative background. I think I'd be looking for as much help as possible. But if you've got like a really clear vision and like you're a food photographer, you know what these things should look like. Had you, out of interest, had you done cookbooks in the past for other people?
No, I've never shot a cookbook for anyone else, so I thought, why not do my own to start off with? And it's been great. I've been working on it since April, so it's been it will probably have been about 9 months by the time I'm finished with it. But again, it's been really good to kind of have that freedom of control where like if I wasn't happy with something, I could reshoot it, or things like that.
Yeah, you're not sort of watching the clock so much for I'm paying for a photographer to do this book.
Exactly. No, I'm really lucky.
You can get it right.
My partner's a graphic designer, and he's been so kind as to put together the layout for me, so I haven't had to stress too much about that. And my partner's mum is a nutritionist, so she's been able to have eyes on the cookbook as well. So I kind of thought, we've got the whole sort of like family team going on here. It's a great combination.
Almost like it was destined.
Exactly.
Well, is there any recipes that like you're really really proud of that you want to talk about most when people ask you about the book?
Yeah, so I really love the vegan fish cakes. I used to love a fish cake in my pre-vegan days, and these ones are really delicious. Made with like nori seaweed to kind of get that fishy taste, as well as capers in there to kind of get that saltiness. Like a little bit of mustard, and like the whole breadcrumbing process like is really fun. Obviously not on a weeknight, do it on a weekend where you don't have to, you won't have like the Tuesday night sweet potato incident, give yourself some time.
You won't end up with cereal.
Yeah, exactly. But I really love that one. And there's a taco recipe in there that I really love. And just lots of recipes as well that we've been cooking over the years that we've come to love and are really easy, really delicious, and also just appropriate for people with IBD as well.
Nice. Have you managed to try it out with friends and family, like outside of your partner and so on, who's obviously got a vested interest? But it'd be fascinating to hear. Like, have you shared some of those recipes with other people to get a bit of their approval, if you like?
Yes, yeah. So all year I've been foisting recipes on friends, whether they like it or not. So during the summer when we had barbecues, I would make lots of the different dips and sauces and put those out and get people to eat them. And sometimes if I have I've been shooting, so I've got like an overflow of recipes, I make people come over for lunch and get them to eat as long as they give me their feedback. And one of our close friends lives right down the road, so every time I've got lots of extra food from where I've been developing and then shooting, I'm like, you need to come and pick up some food. So sending them away with lots of like Tupperware to get their feedback. So that's been really useful. So everyone who's kind of given their feedback and their thoughts has been, it's been really invaluable for me as well.
Sounds like it was great to be in your orbit whilst this book was being produced.
Yeah, you'd think
food
so.
Would just come your way.
I think sometimes it's been a bit too much though, when there's like the fourth tray of sweet potato brownie that's coming out. People are like, do you know what? This was great the first time and even the second time, but the fourth time I'm kind of done.
Was there any of those recipes where you refinement, you just had to keep trying it and tweaking it and changing it?
Yeah, I would say the sweet potato brownie. It was. Yeah. I think it's
there's a theme with sweet potatoes being a cause of difficulty for you.
They're my nemesis vegetable, apparently. I think as well, because I'm more of a natural cook rather than a baker, the sweets section was quite challenging for me. And especially because of the nature of the disease, you don't want to load up with loads of sugar. So it was kind of trying to create recipes that were still really yummy and like sweet and like a treat, but things that aren't sort of, like a whole tub of vegan butter is inside them. So finding sort of sweetness from things like sweet potato or dates, a little bit of maple syrup. So yeah, those brownies did get made quite a lot as I was trying to find the right ratio of like cocoa powder and how many dates to put in and all of that kind of stuff.
Was that element of making things kind of delicious, like you mentioned, like that you wanting there to be sweet treats and so on, was that quite important to you from your experience of perhaps researching, other maybe cookbooks or other resources for people with IBD? Because I could imagine, when you say sweet potato brownie, I don't necessarily think, that would be in an IBD cookbook. I think, that might be in any vegan cookbook that you could find, and no deprivation of any food type there. But my naive kind of like mindset going into it would be, it'll be ultra healthy and quite, almost joyless. Was it really important to you to bring as much of that kind of joy and normality, if you like, into this book?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of as I was saying before, like, it was quite important to me to be like, well, what distinguishes this cookbook to be an IBD cookbook rather than just a plant-based cookbook? Because obviously there are lots of vegan cookbooks you could get. But as before I said, this one, it's got nutritional advice kind of like in the opening chapters, or not advice because I'm not a nutritionist, but kind of like some information about how the digestive system works and like, the role of fiber in IBD and like a few sort of evidence-based research studies around diet in relation to IBD. So it's got that. All of the recipes are obviously whole foods and plant-based. And then there's no raw veg. So I've got like a section on salads, but for instance, all of the salads are cooked. So you're not trying to battle with, like a raw cucumber and then feeling really gross.
Yeah.
And yeah, no spice, and lots of substitution options, so that again, you know, you're not kind of looking at the recipe and thinking, oh, well, I can't tolerate aubergine, what am I supposed to switch? Like, hopefully it's like each page generally tends to have like a tip that's kind of in relation to IBD. So for instance, a few of the recipes have got turmeric in, and curcumin is like an active ingredient in turmeric, which has been kind of said to be helpful for people with ulcerative colitis. So just kind of different things like that, like peppered throughout the cookbook. And then of course, like the dessert section, I wanted it to be delicious, but also kind of healthy as well, because yeah, unfortunately it's not the best thing for us to kind of load our bodies up on loads of sugar and like loads of butter and that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is a sort of an off the book question, but kind of connected. Like, how difficult is eating out with the current vegan options as somebody with this kind of a condition?
I think that probably depends on where you live, and it probably depends on where you're at with your disease and how active it is. Because as I mentioned before, there was a time where I could barely eat solid foods like at all, so I kind of wouldn't be going out. But then there have been times where I've not been in remission, but I've still been able to kind of eat out and live to kind of like 70% of like my max capacity. So I think it's just kind of maybe looking at menus in advance to see what they've got. And again, just avoiding things that are super maybe like gluten heavy. Like, I know personally that if I have like a certain type of vegan burger that's like made of like seitan or something, it's going to sit like a brick in my stomach and it's going to make me feel unwell. So I think it's kind of knowing your own body and knowing what kind of triggers your body and what doesn't, and then sort of using that as a steer as to what kind of foods and what kind of restaurants you should be aiming towards. But I think in general, things that are just kind of very easily digestible. There's a really great restaurant in Bristol called Habesha, which is like Ethiopian, and it's just so delicious and really easy to digest. So that's an example from my own life.
Awesome. I love it. It'd be remiss of us not to tell folks where to go about getting a copy of your book. What would they do? Where would they go?
Yeah, so it's going to be on pre-sale in December, and it will be ready to ship in January. I have a page on my website about the cookbook. My website is www.helena.rose.murphy.net, and it will be available on Amazon.
Awesome. I'll put links in the show notes, and we'll also, I think, when it is released, I'll do a little bit in the intro just to remind people to go back to this episode and check out those show notes and give it a click.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you.
I think, you know, if there's 500,000 people out there that this could benefit, I think it's an amazing sort of service you're doing in producing this book and sharing your experiences.
So thank you.
It's awesome, really is. No, thank you so much, and thanks for your time. I love chatting with you.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you so much for having me.